New updates in the Sean Diddy Combs legal saga. The rap mogul gets an official sentencing date. He gets hit with allegations from a shocking new lawsuit. A juror speaks out. And also, apparently, Diddy receives a standing ovation from inmates in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. But I'll tell you what, this case, not over. No. Important hearing today. Sort of. We got to talk about why. Well, Judge Arun Subramanian had sent a tentative October 3rd sentencing date for Diddy on his convictions of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Remember, that's what he was convicted of. He was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy, and he was acquitted of the 2 sex trafficking counts. But he was convicted of these prostitution charges. And at one point, there was reporting that defense counsel for Sean Combs and prosecutors, they had then agreed to switch the date to September 22nd. And we thought, okay, because today's hearing was supposed to be about expediting the October hearing. Then they agreed to September 22nd. Now apparently it's back to October 3rd. This is all over the place. Very confusing. We'll get it straightened out.
The unthinkable has happened. Diddy, once untouchable, now faces years behind bars. But this isn't just the fall of a music mogul. It's a cultural earthquake that could shake the entire industry. What really went down inside that courtroom? Let's break it all down. Big developments continue to unfold in the legal drama surrounding music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. A sentencing date has finally been set. New allegations have surfaced through a civil lawsuit. A juror has gone public with their perspective, and strangely enough, Combs reportedly received a standing ovation from fellow inmates during his trial. Despite all of this, one thing is certain: the case is far from over. Judge Arun Subramanian has tentatively scheduled Combs' sentencing for October 3rd. This stems from his conviction on 2 counts of transporting individuals for the purpose of prostitution. It's worth noting that he was acquitted of the more serious racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking charges. At one point, both the defense and prosecutors appeared to agree to move the date up to September 22nd. But the schedule has swung back and forth, making the timeline murky and confusing. What's particularly striking is that Combs' legal team initially pushed for an earlier sentencing. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo emphasized the emotional weight of the case, pointing out that 2 of Combs' daughters, who lost their mother, Kim Porter, in 2018, were present in the courtroom. With Combs denied bail after the verdict, his lawyers have been pressing for a quicker resolution in hopes of reducing the time he spends in custody. On the other side, prosecutors have urged caution. Before sentencing, they argue, a pre-sentencing investigation must be completed. This process is thorough. A probation officer evaluates the defendant's personal history, education, employment, health, finances, and prior record. They also gather input from family, friends, victims, and law enforcement, ultimately delivering a comprehensive report to the judge. Since the judge holds wide discretion in determining punishment, this background work carries serious weight as it stands. Even before that investigation is finalized, prosecutors estimate Combs could be facing 51 to 63 months behind bars, roughly 4 to 5 years in prison. Combs' attorneys are lobbying for a far lighter sentence, just 21 to 27 months. Essentially, a year and a half to 2 years, since he has already been held in federal custody at MDC Brooklyn since last September. A sentence on the lower end could mean he's credited with time served and wouldn't spend much longer behind bars. But the sentencing guidelines leave wide room for interpretation. On paper, each count of transportation for prostitution carries a maximum penalty of 10 years. Stacked together, that's 20 years. Realistically, legal experts agree such an outcome is unlikely, given the specifics of the case. On the other extreme, because there is no mandatory minimum, it's technically possible that Combs could walk free with only time served, though that too seems improbable, especially considering the repeated incidents involving Jane Doe and Cassie, who were transported across state lines for sex. For a man once at the pinnacle of the entertainment world, the fall has been staggering. When the verdict was read, the courtroom went silent. In that charged moment, Sean Combs, known for his unshakable public persona, wept openly. It wasn't the theatrics of a showman. It was the collapse of a figure facing the weight of accountability, and the end of an empire he had spent decades building.
So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I gotta say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for Rico for a lot of different reasons, and the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to.
That.
Right, they don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event, so he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If they had called...
This was reality laid bare. The moment when years of whispers, scandals, and backroom maneuvering finally collided with the truth. For decades, Sean Diddy Combs had been one of the most recognizable faces in music and culture, a mogul whose name carried weight across boardrooms, red carpets, and stadiums. He was more than an entertainer, he was an empire builder, a symbol of ambition, wealth, and untouchability. But now, inside a tense Manhattan courtroom, the empire cracked in real time. The jury's decision didn't simply surprise observers, sent shockwaves across the industry. For years, accusations against Combs had circulated in gossip blogs, anonymous whispers, and insider conversations. Yet, nothing had ever stuck. Many wondered if his influence, his resources, and his reach had kept the shadows at bay. The guilty verdict shattered that illusion. Those rumors, long dismissed as speculation, were now etched into the record of law. Inside the courtroom, the transformation was immediate and jarring. The confident, polished mogul persona that Combs carried so effortlessly in public disintegrated. The instant the word guilty echoed through the chamber, it was a sound that seemed to reverberate against the walls, cutting through the hushed silence. Combs lowered his head, buried his face in his hands, and wept. For the first time in decades, the man who built a career on swagger and unshakable confidence appeared stripped of all armor. These weren't the tears of a performer. They were the tears of a man staring into a reality he could know. Longer control. The weight of the proceedings pressed on everyone in the room. Prosecutors had laid out a damning case that stretched back years, tying Combs to allegations of sex trafficking and exploitation. The charges carried enormous stakes, not just for his freedom, but for his legacy, his family, and the culture that once embraced him. Even before the verdict was read, the tension was visible. His family members, sitting quietly in the gallery, grew increasingly emotional. Their eyes glistened, their shoulders sank, their hands clutched tightly together. The once joyous image of a celebrity family now looked fragile, fractured, and afraid. Combs himself struggled to maintain the upbeat front he had worked so hard to project during the trial. At earlier hearings, he'd entered the courtroom with his chin high, exchanging polite nods with his attorneys, forcing faint smiles to cameras. But as the trial dragged on, that energy began to dim. By the final days, the cracks were visible, shoulders slouched, eyes heavy, movements subdued. The man who had built a life out of projecting control seemed to sense that control slipping away. And then came the verdicts. Not guilty on counts 1, 2, and 4, including an acquittal on one of the sex trafficking charges. The announcement sent a ripple of shock through the room. For many, it was a surprise, particularly the second count, which prosecutors had pushed heavily. Yet alongside the surprise came a recognition of the jury's role. Some in the courtroom, even those expecting harsher outcomes, nodded with a quiet respect. The system had spoken, and the jury had made its judgment with the gravity such decisions demand. But relief was fleeting. The convictions that remained were devastating enough to dismantle everything Combs had built. They were more than legal consequences, they were symbolic. A career once thought untouchable now hung in tatters. His reputation, carefully constructed over decades of music, fashion, television, and business, was scarred in ways that no PR strategy could heal. The empire built on power, opulence, and relentless ambition suddenly seemed fragile, as though it had always been a facade waiting to collapse. For the industry, the moment carried larger implications. If someone as powerful and connected as Sean Combs could be held accountable, who else might be vulnerable? Whose secrets might finally surface? Whose whispered stories might find validation? As observers filed out of the courtroom, the sense was clear: this wasn't just about one man. It was about the shifting tides of an entire culture. A warning shot to an industry long accused of protecting its giants at the expense of truth. And for Combs himself, the reality was unavoidable. No matter the acquittals, no matter the technicalities, the shadow of conviction loomed large. His tears in that courtroom weren't just about the sentence they were about the irreversible fall of a man who once seemed immune to consequence. The jury's words had done more than decide his fate. They had dismantled his legacy, piece by piece, in front of the world.
Listening to this case, listening to all the testimony, listening to all the evidence, and that was the verdict that they had rendered.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised that they found him guilty of transportation to engage in prostitution. We have been saying since for weeks on this show that felt like a straightforward path to conviction. Wasn't surprised not guilty with Jane, given some of the gray areas of her testimony, but also the jury didn't even ask for one readback of her testimony or anything to do with her testimony, so it made me think they might have already been decided there. I was surprised about Cassie Ventura sex trafficking just because, like you said, the readback of that testimony, and then shortly thereafter, they came back yesterday and said, we have a verdict on that charge. So I thought, they're convinced. And when it came to racketeering, I thought they were still going to be hung, because they said they were at an impasse yesterday. It seemed like, based on their note, there was no way that would change. The judge told them to continue deliberating. They come back today, and like in an hour, they come back not guilty on racketeering. I'm not really sure what that split ultimately will be. Maybe the jurors will speak out and we'll hear. Got to ask you about Diddy's reaction. Okay, so we have courtroom sketches of what it looked like. You were in there. What was his reaction to the verdict?
Oh, he was very pleased with the verdict. Obviously, I think for the defense and the defendant, that being Sean Combs, I think obviously they would have wanted an acquittal on all the charges. But I think given that they weren't a conviction on the more serious charges of RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie in one charge and Jane in another charge, I think overall Combs was very, very pleased with the jury, to the point where I saw him kind of mouth a little thank you to the jurors as they were still sitting kind of in the jury box, as they were kind of leaving for the end of their day. Obviously, we still have some more matters to address for our end. But in terms of just his reaction, even his family's reaction, Jesse, I think they were so happy knowing that there's such a strong possibility that their father will come home. Obviously, if he would have been convicted on the more serious charges, that might have been a different discussion. But given that he was only convicted on count 3 and 5, that being the Mann Act, it seems like, given that it comes with a lesser penalty and sentencing, I think the family is like, yes, our father is coming home, our loved one is coming home, and we hope to see him very, very soon.
And talk about a reaction. Outside that courthouse, my gosh, what has been going on out there? There's verbal disputes, people spraying things. Just give us a brief summary of what you've witnessed outside that courthouse after the verdict.
I've witnessed a lot, Jesse. A lot was going on. There was kind of, I will even say, pandemonium after the verdict was read. And outside, a lot of Diddy supporters, a lot of people who are kind of with the Free Diddy.
The judge's words cut deeper than any sentence. His ruling wasn't aimed at Sean Combs alone, it was directed at the entire industry. Fame is not immunity. Power is not protection. Wealth cannot rewrite justice. Those words rippled far beyond the courtroom walls. This wasn't just a conviction. It was a reckoning, and Combs knew it. Almost immediately, 50 Cent fired off a cryptic post. Told y'all, no more games. He didn't need to explain. For years, he had hinted at the shadows surrounding Diddy's empire, And now the courts had made those whispers real. The internet erupted, fans, celebrities, and insiders chimed in. Some expressed shock. Others admitted they'd long expected this outcome. A few finally broke their silence, saying what they had kept private for years. Part of the reason the case drew such intensity was Combs's wealth and influence. Early in the proceedings, his defense team had offered a sweeping bail package, one that included private security, limited communication, and even restrictions on internet access, but the court rejected it. At the time, Combs was staring down potential RICO and sex trafficking charges that carried decades in prison. Effectively a life sentence for a 55-year-old, with a private jet at his disposal. Prosecutors argued he posed both a flight risk and a danger to the community. Letters from alleged victims only reinforced that stance. In the end, the judge refused bail. Behind the scenes, the defense explored new proposals, even hinting at housing Combs under strict supervision in Miami. But after the convictions, the landscape shifted. He was no longer a mogul awaiting trial, he was an inmate waiting for years in federal prison. Then came the unraveling. His inner circle scattered. Calls stopped. The entourage that once clung to his name began deleting posts, severing ties, disappearing into silence. For the first time in decades, Combs stood alone. When sentencing finally arrived, the courtroom braced for impact. The defense begged for mercy, pointing to his philanthropy, his role in shaping modern music, his cultural legacy. But the prosecution painted a different picture. This wasn't a single mistake. They argued, but a lifestyle of secrecy, manipulation, and intimidation. The judge sided with the prosecution. The message was unmistakable. This would not be a slap on the wrist. Not months, years, real prison time. And in that moment, Sean Diddy Combs was stripped of every title he had ever claimed. He was no longer the mogul, the hitmaker, the power broker. He was simply a man facing the full weight of justice.
That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought in our private security team and we showed him who was going to be.
Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric, charged with the kind of tension that defines historic moments. Cameras flashed like lightning strikes, desperate to capture every expression, every reaction, every crack in the facade. Protesters, on one side, erupted in cheers, their chants echoing through the city streets as if justice had finally found its voice. On the other side, stunned supporters stood frozen, eyes wide, lips trembling, unable to process the fall of a man they had once viewed as invincible. What unfolded on those courthouse steps was more than the downfall of Sean Diddy Combs. It was a symbolic declaration. Even the most untouchable figures can be dragged down by the weight of accountability. The collapse came with brutal speed. Endorsements evaporated overnight, brand names rushing to sever ties before public outrage consumed them. Business partners, who once fought to be in his orbit, quietly stepped away. Streaming platforms, once eager to showcase his music, began pulling tracks from playlists. What initially seemed like a stumble quickly revealed itself to be a freefall, a total dismantling of the empire Combs had built over 3 decades. And the damage did not stop with him alone. A network of handlers, enablers, and silent protectors, the very people who had insulated him for years, were suddenly thrust under the spotlight. Their silence, once their greatest shield, became evidence against them. In back offices and boardrooms across the industry, panic spread like wildfire. Phones that once rang endlessly with opportunities went dead. PR firms shredded contracts. Executives deleted photos, emails, entire histories of association. Loyalty evaporated in the face of survival, and then the leaks began. Whispered rumors hardened into detailed accounts. Former insiders stepped forward, sketching a portrait of a carefully controlled world where nothing happened by accident. They described mansion parties under heavy surveillance, with cameras watching everything and everyone. Guests surrendered their phones at the door, stripped of the ability to record, contact, or expose what they saw. The environment wasn't indulgence, it was calculation. A system of control designed to shield Combs from accountability, to ensure his power remained unchecked. Stories spilled of intimidation, tactics, of people silenced by the fear of losing careers or reputations. This wasn't the chaos of celebrity excess. It was strategy, cold, deliberate, and precise. And now, that strategy had collapsed in full public view. The ripple effects were staggering. Across the entertainment industry, the ground shook. Events were abruptly canceled. Album launches were delayed or shelved. Television projects and film deals connected to Combs's name were quietly suspended. Media outlets, some of which had long ignored allegations, scrambled to publish investigations, desperate to avoid being accused of complicity. For years, whispers had circulated in backrooms and anonymous posts. But with the guilty verdict, those whispers gained credibility. For the first time, victims both past and present felt the landscape shift in their favor. Many believed their voices, once dismissed, might finally be taken seriously. Through it all, one voice kept echoing above the noise. 50 Cent, never one to mince words. He seized the moment, fanning the flames of public discourse. His cryptic posts and sharp commentary hinted that what had come to light was only the surface of something much deeper. He framed the saga not as an isolated downfall, but as a cultural reckoning, one that would ripple far beyond Diddy himself. Love him or hate him, his voice had power, and in this moment, it was reshaping the conversation, forcing the industry to confront what it had long ignored. In the end, Diddy's collapse wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. The mask of glamour, luxury, and invincibility that he had worn for decades slipped away, revealing the darker reality that lay beneath. His legacy will not be remembered for the platinum albums, the sold-out parties, or the fashion lines. It will not be defined by the awards, the accolades, or even the empire he so carefully constructed. Instead, it will stand as a warning carved into the annals of pop culture, that power built on silence, control, and intimidation will eventually crumble. His fall reminded the world that no empire, no matter how opulent, is immune to collapse. If it can happen to Sean Combs, it can happen to anyone, and with that realization, the industry trembled. What was once dismissed as whispers had become a rallying cry. The illusion of untouchability was gone. The facade had shattered. And the entertainment world, left to sift through the rubble, now faces a future where the rules have changed and the mighty are no longer beyond reach.